Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Public Management Academy cohort number 7 project presentations. I just wanted to start the day off by saying that I'm super pumped and thankful and excited to be here today. Today is the culmination of a long journey. I feel like it's gone by fast, but I'm sure that it's been definitely a long journey as far as a lot of work in our sessions, a lot of the dedication that you had in the class as far as contributions, but also a ton of work outside. So I'm just so excited to see all the deliverables and the projects and kind of the impact and innovation and change that you have to offer. I know that throughout the week, the last couple of weeks we've been chatting and talking one-on-one, so we know kind of what the preview is, but it's always exciting to see the finished product. So thank you. I want to say welcome to our participants, any guests, any stakeholders. I also want to do a big shout out to all of our sponsoring organizations that continue to help us to develop this program, expand the brand across the state, and obviously provide the financial the resources for us that we can continue on. The program, we're obviously in our 7th academy here for this, and going into our 2nd year of the growth and expansion, and it just keeps getting better. And the projects are basically, I think, the best way, the proof in the pudding, I guess you could say, of what the improvements and how things are growing over time. So I'm very honored to be here today. Thank you for all your hard work. I really hope that today is also to a celebration of everything and a positive, supportive atmosphere, because you all work in very difficult jobs, environments. Obviously, we're in a stressful time during this COVID pandemic and all the things going on in the world today. And I'm so honored that you keep on persevering and continue to try to provide service to the community. So let's celebrate today, pat each other on the back, and really enjoy each other's company as we view and get a chance to share some fellowship today. The process is going to be that we're going to have about a half hour for each presentation, and then at the end of each presentation, there's an evaluation process that I'm going to pass the baton for Alexandra to kind of go into more specifics of how that part of the day is going to look. So Alexandra, can you take that part?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Rob. So as Rob mentioned, we do have an evaluation form that is specific for each presenter or each group that is presenting today. So it's just a standard Google form, and we appreciate your feedback. In fact, the presenter will appreciate your feedback. So what we're going to do logistically is send the link to the Google form 3 times, usually at the beginning, middle, and end of when the presenter is speaking, in case you miss it or in case you have to step out. And we just ask that you pull up that form and jot down some feedback for that presenter. So what we're going to do is we are then going to send that feedback to the presenter, and it's just helpful feedback for them to utilize as they are prepping their final report. So again, we do ask, even if you aren't in the Public Management Academy cohort, to fill out that evaluation form, just because that presenter will really appreciate the feedback. And again, we will send that in the chat.
Thanks, Alexandra. And just to clarify, the capstone experience is a 2-part process. So today we're starting the first part, which is the oral presentation or the project presentations. And then the second part of the capstone experience is the actual written report. We do it the sequence like this, where we do the oral presentation first, so that you can get some feedback, the pros, cons, maybe some suggestions, whatnot. And then you can basically put that information, or hopefully use that information to update and inform your written report that is due, at a later date, probably about a month or so from today and tomorrow's presentations. So there is a method to the madness. We hope that you will get some decent feedback from folks. But if there's anything that you'd like to follow up with that particular person, or anything else that you'd like to add, pros and cons, feel free to let us know how we can intervene or communicate that with the person as we move forward. I'm sure that just from what I've seen, there are going to be a lot of positive comments, and we want this to be a supportive environment. So please just know that as a public service announcement. You'll see here too, as we go through this, as today's session and tomorrow's session, that we have a nice diverse mix of individual and group projects. We also have a nice mix of very different levels of government, both at the local and the county and the state level. So a lot of different issues that we're resolving, and a lot of things you'll see are resonant to what the issues are of today. So for example, succession planning and the concept of the silver tsunami and a lot of the baby boomers retiring, trying to deal with ways of succession planning and bringing people in and continue to invest and grow their ability, but then also looking at things like developing a strategic plan for organizations that we'll see here shortly today. So I'm hoping that you will enjoy these and hopefully take something from these as we move forward. And I'm really excited because these will continue to be added to our library of previous cohort presentations, and so that we can continue to share these best practices with our stakeholders in the community and future participants. So again, I want to say thank you to everyone who's here today, and especially for our visitors, or those that might view this today or in the future. Thank you for your time. So this is the last part of the Public Management Academy number 7. This is the last aspect of your last component requirement. But for those that are trying to make up any kind of sessions, that we have cohort number 8 that's currently about halfway through the program, and cohort number 9, it will start on Thursday, March 10th. So for those that have any kind of makeups, there's plenty of opportunities to do that. So please let our staff know, and we'd be happy to help you get registered for any of those open things. Before we transition over to our first presentation today, I just want to give a huge shout out to Alexandra and the rest of our team, Alexandra, Nina, Amira, and Bianca. We have a wonderful staff of dedicated employees that are constantly working behind the scenes to make sure that we're providing sound programming, and that customer service is one of our focal points. So I want to say thank you for not only putting together today's presentation, but all of the hard work that you put into the program to make sure that we're all successful. So if you get a chance to shout them out, please do so down the road, and couldn't do it without you. So thank you there. And also, before we pull up our first presenter, the presentation schedule not only has the lineup of the events, but also will show a short description of each one of those presentations as we go through as well. So if you would like more information about the projects before the presenters get going, you can see a preview there, what Alexander just pulled up. So anyway, without further ado, I'd like to get our first presenter called up and pass the baton to him. Go ahead, Alexander, do you have something?
Oh, yes, and I do just want to mention that there will be a Q&A section as well. So we are reserving the last 10 minutes or so for audience questions. With that said, we ask that you send those questions in the designated Q&A box. So that should be on your screen. If you have any comments as well, you can send it through the Q&A box too, and we will make sure to relay those comments. Again, try to keep everything positive and also constructive. So please be respectful of the presenters. We have disabled the chat from the audience members to the panelists. So again, if you have any comments, please send those in the Q&A box. And then also too, please note that today's session is being recorded.
Sorry, thank you, appreciate that. So we're gonna bring up our first presenter of the day. We're gonna start out the gates pretty strong here with Mr. Anthony Luke. Anthony is a member of the City of Cleveland Division of Fire, and he is working on a strategic plan to help bring the fire department to the next level. He has done an amazing job with this and definitely set the bar very high. When we went through our project management day one, he was way ahead of the curve, and no pressure to anybody else that's in the cohort as we move forward. But I just want to say that from my perspective, Anthony did a wonderful job of capsulating the overall scope of what he's trying to do, put together a very thorough presentation for when we went through the project management day. So I'm sure that today's presentation will be the same.
Good morning.
Good morning. So Anthony, I think you can take it away.
Okay. Make sure everybody can see my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
No, I do not.
I'm not sure why you can't.
Do you see the share screen button at all?
Yeah, I pressed it.
Oh, something's coming through. Well, now I can see your desktop.
Okay, got it.
I think we got it now. Yep, great.
Okay. First, I'd like to thank Robert and Alexandra, because yes, it's a lot of work for the participants, but they're here every week, week in, week out, answering all our questions. And I just really appreciate it. My project is, as you can see, Fire 2032, Building a Resilient Organization. As a matter of introduction, my name is Anthony Luke. I'm an assistant chief with the Cleveland Division of Fire. My project is basically taking a global view of the Cleveland Division of Fire, our operations, and how our operations will match up with the challenges that will be faced going forward in the future. So just as an overview of our department, established in 1863, just over 100,000 incidents annually, and you can see the rest of the demographics. The most important one that I want to focus on is the 2022 estimated budget of $102 million. 2022 represents the first time the division has went over $100 million in budgetary allocation. So that'll come up as a key component later in my presentation. This is a saying on our department that has been drilled into each one of us right from the academy. 158 years of tradition, unimpeded by progress. Firefighters by nature are very stubborn, and once they find something that works, they do not want to change it. And that bleeds over into the administrative, the business side, and that's where we're facing a lot of our challenges. We're kind of stuck in the past, and we need to bring ourselves a little bit forward to face the challenges that we're going to be going through. At this point, many people always ask what it's like to be a firefighter. So before I got into the nuts and bolts of our organization, I was thinking, how can I present on what's a day like for a firefighter? Usually people will show fire trucks, fires, firefighters crawling into fires, but everybody knows that. A lot of our day is spent on dealing with the public directly, answering questions and interactions. This is a little amusing way to kind of show you a piece of that.
Excuse me, sir. Would you guys mind moving the fire truck? Sir, I understand they shot your car. They also shot you, sir. Maybe we can fix those problems first. Gotta get to a dentist appointment. You guys are locking me in. Are we actually having this conversation right now? Excuse me, I'm a doctor. I don't think we're doing this, y'all. I think I know what I'm doing. What kind of doctor are you? I'm a urologist. Okay, so you called 911 and said you were having chest pains. so I could get a bottle of water out of the refrigerator for you. Okay, so her blood sugar was low, so you gave her insulin. Okay. Sir, if there's anything I've learned in my very short amount of time in the medical field, is nothing ever accidentally ends up there. Let me start with what really.
I can honestly say that each one of those skits, I have had a personal interaction with a citizen similar to that or identical to that. That's what we do most of our days, whether it's on fire scenes or medical scenes or doing public relations. We are interacting directly with citizens on various topics, and that's kind of where the humor comes in at. So as overall project summary, my project was basically to discuss the structure of our organization, the problems that are inherent in that structure, to try to find some solutions, but those solutions have to be financially viable, and they also have to have some resiliency to them. They have to be something that no matter a change of leadership, change of ideas, that they're structurally embedded into our organization so that we're not constantly going from one solution to another solution to another solution, because that's when you start to get really expensive. And then the last thing was to identify the external stakeholders that have interests in our operations or benefited from our operations. Excuse me, because to solve a lot of our problems, we need to leverage people and agencies outside of our own to get things implemented. One of the common topics that you'll see in my presentation is the communication between firefighters and their political leaders or the political administration that they have to report to. That's always problematic. And the reason for that is because many times we speak a different language. Firefighters by nature are direct. We just want to identify the problem, solve the problem, move on to the next problem. Politicians by nature, they have a different priority set. And when you're speaking to politicians or even city administrators, if you don't figure out what their priority is, many times, no matter what you put in your conversation, they just won't hear you because they're focused on their priority. Once you address their priority, then my experience is they're open to help you, to assist you, and it just makes for a better relationship. Firefighters being stubborn how we usually are, we don't want to bend or consider political priorities or consider other people's views. So that's where a lot of times we have a lot of problems communicating, and that bleeds over into our operations. We can't get this is just an overall goal, the official goals of this project to create a strategic vision, a strategic plan, and to identify stakeholders. Now, when I spoke about this project to some of my members of my department and in researching the project, I also access fire chiefs nationwide. And speaking about this project, they would get lost in some of this language. So what I did on the next slide, I basically just kind of, I don't want to say dumbed it down, but just to keep it simple. The goal of this project is to create a strategic plan that the division can use going in the future. The focal points were for my administration now and in the future, just to have a document that they can look at and would direct their activities. And as a byproduct of this, to provide the city administration and also like city council members and other political leaders a real good view of what we do. Because a lot of times I see the problems in communication with the political administration is because they really don't have a good understanding of what we do. And that falls back on us to communicate that clearly, which I think we've done a poor job of up to this point. The current threats to our organization and the fire service nationwide, I think, municipal governments increasingly underfunding challenges. Anybody locally in the Cleveland area over the past 10 to 15 years, you're aware that the state has cut funding going down to the local level. Cities used to get a rebate on their taxes from the state. That pretty much has been eliminated. Well, those rebates and that tax money was where our budget directly comes from. So then that financial pressure is then pushed down on our organization, and we have to deal with it. Fire deaths and injuries are decreasing each year. Later in this presentation, I'll show you a chart. Many people don't realize how fire deaths have been impacted over the past 20 to 40 years in the fire service because of increased codes, better code compliance, and just modern technology. We have decreased fire deaths immensely. Personnel costs are rising every year. That's pretty much a no-brainer. And the division's only major funding source, once again, is taxpayer dollars. We do get some funding through grants, but that usually equates to less than 1% of our overall operational budget on any year. So all of our funding comes straight from the taxpayers. So when the taxpayers are under financial stress, that puts us under financial stress. These are some of the problems that we create ourselves. These aren't problems that happen and we have to react to them. These are problems from our actions. This is what results. We have a severe lack of management training or preparation of our members to assume management positions. We're very good at training them to be firefighters. We're very good at training them to be paramedics and emergency medical technicians. But as far as managers, personnel management, budgetary management, procurement, things like that, that's pretty much learned on the job. And there are a lot of failure points in that. We have a lack of direct investment in our employees. As I'll highlight later in the presentation, I believe the focus, the division's focus has moved off of the employee as the center of everything we do. We don't invest in our employees beyond training them in the academy and then throwing them out to the street to serve the citizens. That investment drops dramatically. I believe we need to reinvest in our employees, and as far as professional development after the academy, they need to professionally develop all throughout their careers. I think we need to focus on their physical well-being more, their mental health well-being, and I'll show that later. We have an insular organizational culture, but that's prevalent throughout public safety. Whether you're talking about fire departments, police departments, emergency medical response organizations, they're usually insular because it's kind of like a war mentality mindset that you believe you're going into the trenches and the only people that understands what you're going through are the people that go with you. So that creates like an insular culture, and that also creates communication barriers. We have a death grip on tradition, as I highlighted earlier. If it isn't broke, we don't want to fix it, and we are just totally hesitant to change on anything. And then we have an intense focus on the now versus the future. Within the fire service, especially within this organization, we rarely have conversations about the future. Our leaders amongst the command staff, which I'm a member of, it rarely will we have an in-depth conversation about what the future brings and how we're going to meet it. Our conversations are usually some current problem and how we have to address it, and then we just move on to the next problem. And I believe that impinges on our ability to strategically plan and meet future challenges. This video, I'm sure most of the audience has seen it before. It was a video released by Nextel in the 80s, but of everything I've ever seen in all my years as a firefighter, this shows the mentality of a firefighter perfectly. The premise of the video is, what if firefighters ran the U.S. Congress? So I'll just play this here.
All right, firefighters, settle down. How about the budget? And the taxes? Anyone want better roads? All in favor? Opposed? Done. A lot of paper to tell us we need clean water. Need clean water, guys? This is the easiest job I've ever had. We're out of here. Get more done now.
Like I said, of all the videos I've ever seen and all the information, that video shows the mentality of a firefighter. The fire ground, what we call the fire ground, meaning when we respond to a structure fire, when we get to the house, that becomes the fire ground. The fire ground of firefighters is a sacred place. It's separate from reality in our mind because things operate differently there. On the fire ground, we just identify problems, identify solutions, move on to the next. On the fire ground, there is no, we're gonna try. The only thing on the fire ground is we're gonna do. When you get an order on the fire ground, you never question the order, you just do it. Even if you feel you can't accomplish the order, you figure out a way to accomplish it. It simplifies a lot of stuff, and we have that mentality because that is our response on how to deal with a stressful situation. The fire ground is the most stressful situation you could ever imagine. You have citizens screaming at you. There could be children inside trapped. You have cameras going most of the time. With the modern technology, everybody has a cell phone, so you're under scrutiny. Everything has to be done now. When we pull up on the scene, there we have at least 20 to 30 priorities that need to be done like 5 minutes ago. So the way we deal with that is we just focus on what needs to be done now and what needs to be done after that. And we always accomplish the task, figure it out. There's no complaining, there's no whining. We love the fire ground. And that's why firefighters want to be firefighters. And when you take them out of that, say like when you try to get them to do medical response, yes, they will bring a lot of that mentality to medical response. But when you talk to them, they would rather be on a fire ground. So that's kind of how the mentality of a firefighter works. The chart up right now is the annual fire fatalities from 1944 to 2021. This is what I mentioned earlier. As you can see, going back to 1944, in the city of Cleveland, at least, it was 45 to 50 residents were dying every year from fires. And then we had a peak in 1980, and then from there, fire deaths just dramatically fell. This was related to increasing code enforcement, changing codes, the increase in public education surrounding smoke detectors. To this year, we have a fire death of 11 citizens, reluctantly last year perished from fires. You can see almost in the chart that where it's almost a cyclical phase where it usually goes up and down, up and down. Those cyclical phases are, if you dig into the data from what I did, it's related to programs that were pushed by either the city or the fire department during those periods. We go through a period where we're really focusing on getting smoke detectors in the resident's home, fire deaths drop off. Well, funding for that program drops off, focus goes away, fire deaths tend to trend up. Then we go back into a program where we go into city schools and we're doing a lot of public education. It happens in cyclical phases. So the thing I take from this chart is fire suppression response, which is we call firefighters responding to fires. That's fine and it will always be needed. But the critical thing that we need right now that we really don't focus on is public education and fire prevention. We don't want to respond to the fire. We want to prevent the fire. To respond to a fire, the fire department puts approximately $4 to $6 million worth of apparatus and another $2 to $3 million worth of personnel in front of a residential structure within 4 to 8 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That is a lot of financial resources responding, burning up. You're threatening those financial resources because firefighters get injured, apparatus get damaged. So if you can prevent the actual occurrence of a fire, you eliminate the need for having all of those resources respond on a frequent basis like that. So I think that's one of the pivot points that I got from our project is that we really need to focus on fire prevention instead of fire suppression. Fire suppression we'll always need. Fire suppression, you can look at it like a homeowner's insurance policy. Just because you haven't had a fire or had a claim against your homeowner's policy for the past 25 years eliminating the policy is just not good business because the consequences are so dire. So we will always need firefighters and fire suppression services, but we can leverage the money that we spend for those services to give the citizens and the city a much better business experience. And this is the bottom line. 2021, the total emergency incidents that the Cleveland Fire Department responded to is right here. The key I want everybody to focus on is the fires with financial loss. What that means is a fire occurred and there was some kind of financial loss. A family was put out their home, a family had several rooms burned up, whatever. So out of 74,000, we're reporting that we only had 232 fires with financial loss. That figure is problematic for several reasons. One, I believe that figure to be inaccurate. The Cleveland Division of Fire is horrible at data reporting. Our systems are just not set up properly, and it limits the ability of the individual looking at the data to get good information from that data. So I think our fires with financial loss is higher than that, but that is what we're reporting, so that's what we're gonna go with. There was only 77 fires exceeding $10,000. That represents less than 1% of the total overall incidents, and the total fire loss and the total financial damage that was occurred was just under $5 million with 11 fatalities, like we said before. So the question is, what story does that data tell? Well, remember the figure that I started with, that the fire department's operating budget for this year is $102 million. So the city is spending $102 million to prevent relatively $5 million worth of fire loss. Because as far as the fire fatalities, I believe that we can almost eliminate those completely by just focusing on getting residential smoke alarms into every residence in the city and pretty much intense code compliance in all businesses in the city. I believe if we focus that, those fire fatalities will disappear. But the overall fire loss, what some cities across the nation are looking at, and when their city managers or their mayors or their accountants bring this up, they are met with pretty much a lot of consternation, but they're saying that they would be better just replacing the structure than paying all this money to staff the fire department to respond to it. Now, on the face, that sounds kind of crazy. You're just gonna get rid of the fire department, we're gonna burn all the structures down. But what they're saying is they don't need to place as much apparatus and personnel in the 24-hour ready mode as they currently have, because the fire loss is so low. They'll just have a fund where they'll be replacing structures when fire damage occurs. So say, just for rough numbers, if the city has 1,000 firefighters, they might say, well, we only need to staff 800 firefighters instead of 1,000, and we'll save the 200. So these are the kind of conversations that accountants and city managers nationwide are beginning to have. And this is the challenge that we're going to face. So the data that we're reporting clearly shows that we're going into a period where we're going to be immensely challenged fiscally. So the solution to that, I believe, is we have to expand our mission. We have to provide value-added services. Right now, we only do fire response and medical response. We have to expand that scope. So we provide services well beyond that. So the money that you're paying for those firefighters to staff the stations are not just for fire occurrences. Therefore, a wide variety of services that I believe that we could provide a good service for. This is just a general information to show you the overall operating budget of the fire department, how it increases over years. Operating budget increases by about $700,000 a year annually if you go from 2008 to 2022. One of the key components of this chart right here is you'll notice that, say, for 2022, $100 million, but our salaries and benefits are $95 million. Each year, salaries and benefits accounts for approximately 96% of our overall operating budget. So salaries and benefits is the salary you pay, and then the health benefits, workman's comp, all that. So when you talk about budget cuts, you're talking about personnel cuts. There is no budget cut in the fire department that doesn't result in a personnel cut. Because out of a $100 million budget, only less than $5 million is in anything for personnel. And then when you look over in the training component, that goes into my assertion that we need to refocus on our employees, because we are not providing enough training or investment in employees. A $100 million budget, and we're only doing $65,000 in training. Now that figure is a little bit, you have to know the story behind the figure really, because we have a training academy with a full staff. They do training all year round. That $65,000 does not represent their activity. That $65,000 is for specific training, say like management training, which we don't do, or sending somebody out of town for a specific training purpose. Our academy works all year long, but they are focused on training new candidates and training what we call continuing education. Those are the training components that we need to keep our certificates and our licensures to operate as firefighters. So I just believe we need to invest in training. And the last thing is over in the revenue portion. You see, the fire department doesn't pull in any revenue. We are just a cost. We are just like an insurance policy. So for $100 million in costs, we only pulled in $1.4 million in revenue. And even part of that revenue was related to grants. Usually our normal intake is right around $800,000, $900,000 if we don't receive a grant. This is just a graphic of what the previous chart showed. You can see salaries, wages, benefits takes up most of the fire department's budget. This shows the fire department's demographics. This is a constant challenge. We just had budget presentation to City Council yesterday, and City Council, as they do every year, hammered us for our demographics of our employees. The demographics of the Cleveland Fire Department do not mirror the demographics of the city of Cleveland. As you see, we have a total of 753 members on now. Out of that, 578 are white, 109 are black, 63 Hispanic, and 3 are other. Those are usually of Asian descent. Every year we go through this, and it's just an ongoing problem. The reason this creates a critical problem for us because the people of the city pay our salaries. They are the ones paying for the service. If they don't see themselves represented in the service they pay for, you're gonna have ongoing problems. Because now you're basically saying that their sons, daughters, and relatives, they can't take benefit and become firefighters. We also have the problem, even though in recent years, we have begun to increase the diversity at the firefighter rank. So we're bringing in more diverse firefighters. On the officer rank, as you can see, this problem is even worse. But that problem stems from many years and decades of having a non-diverse workforce. And as that workforce articulates up in promotions, you just don't have the critical mass of people to go into promoted ranks. So until we solve the firefighter entry level diversity problems permanently, we won't see any change in the promotional ranks. And that's what they were arguing about yesterday in our city council. This is another challenge we're gonna have, the age of our facilities. As you can see here, our oldest facility is Station 24, built in 1894, 128 years old. This doesn't even list all of our facilities. They wouldn't list all on the page, so I just listed some to give you an idea of what the spread is. We have only built one fire station in the past, I believe, 20 years. So what this does, you're loading a bomb that will go off in the city sometime in the future. It's a fiscal bomb because our facilities that are aging, our facilities are falling apart, they're not being maintained properly, and they're not being replaced. So at some point, you're going to come to a point where you just have to. There's no way you can't. And then that will be a huge financial liability for the city. So this is another way where I think we're failing in strategic planning and communicating with our political administration. Of all the problems that we face, I just want to emphasize that we are not special. This is faced by the fire service nationwide. What this slide shows is this was a survey ran by the International Council of City Managers and the International Association of Firefighters. They basically asked city managers and fire chiefs what problems they were experiencing and what problems they expected to face in the future. As you can see, increase in number of types and calls for services. We're seeing that here. Declining financial resources, just talked about that. Wellness for personnel, talked about that. Lack of cultural diversity, all these, every last one we are facing in Cleveland. So this is a challenge that's faced across the fire service itself. We're really not special. As part of this project, I also did an employee survey. I sent out a survey to about 400 people in the division and got 63 responses. The fact that I only got 63 responses is indicative of part of the problem that we're facing. We have a workforce that is checking out on us because of the workplace environment. You can just read through some of these comments and you can see what some of the problems are. Now, many people like to say, well, those are just employees, disgruntled employees, and those are just employees that, want everything their way. Yes, we do have that, but when you start to get a large swath of your employees basically saying the same things, that's when you have to assess yourself and ask, what does this signal? What kind of work environment are we creating in our workplace? And then how does this impact our ability to provide service? And I think currently it is impacting our ability to provide service and needs to be addressed. Most of our future threats, these are some of the ones we discussed earlier. I just listed them out. The one here that I want to highlight that hasn't been spoken about is the last one, isolation from our regional peer agencies. The Cleveland Fire Department is the largest fire agency in Northeast Ohio, but we are totally isolated from all of our peer fire departments in the area because of a mentality. Many in our department feel that we are the best, we are better, and suburban firefighters are somehow inferior. I've had the pleasure of working for a suburban department in a part-time position for about 10-year period. And I can tell you without a doubt, suburban firefighters are better trained than we are. They have more certifications and their skill set is right alongside ours. So it's not about who's better. It's just about a matter of perspective and their workplace. They have a different workplace. They don't deal with as many fires as we do in Cleveland, but they deal with more medical related emergencies. What that does, that creates a barrier to communication. So all the suburban agencies pool together, they communicate well with each other, but they don't communicate well with us. And we don't communicate with them. I believe the city of Cleveland and the Cleveland Division of Fire should be a hub for the fire service in the northern part of the state. We have a training academy. That is a resource that many suburban departments don't have and can't afford. We can provide that resource to them as a way to bridge that gap. And then having suburban firefighters alongside Cleveland firefighters, the exchange of information, I believe will result in a lot of inefficiencies that we currently have just being eliminated by us working together. They have resources that we need, we have resources that they need. So I think that's a challenge that we can solve. This is one of the biggest challenges that I believe we're facing as firefighters, is cancer in the fire service. This is something that's not talked about. Firefighters don't like talking about it, and that in itself creates a problem. Any firefighter you talk to will tell you, yes, I know somebody that's died from cancer or going through cancer treatment, or it's just prevalent throughout the fire service. There has been a recent shift where we're trying to focus on it, trying to figure out what we can do to protect our firefighters. And as part of this project, reaching out, doing research, I came across someone from the Cleveland Clinic. And on the next slide, I met a surgeon from the Cleveland Clinic who was also researching this. And what the Cleveland Clinic is proposing is that we have basically a first responder agreement between the Cleveland Clinic and the city of Cleveland. Well, the Cleveland Clinic will establish a first responder health clinic specifically for first responders, firefighters, EMS, and police, and their unique needs where they can talk to somebody who knows about their unique needs. Cancer screening programs, health navigator, and specialist referrals. Of all the things I've discovered in researching this project, this is the one I'm most excited about. This is the one I'm gonna put most of my energy into because this is something that we desperately needed. And this is something I think we can get a lot of traction on pretty quickly. This just lists some of the priorities that the fire departments have and that they deal with every day. And these are the conversations that I believe that we don't have within the fire department. We don't speak about each of these, so we have to react to them as they come along. This is just a saying I found helpful. This is a fire chief. I know it's kind of faded out on the screen. It's a fire chief from Virginia. He's basically saying that the fire service has to rely on data and stop relying on our feelings or what we believe. And that's what we do right now. We think we rely on what we believe, and we're kind of weak on the data. This is just a chart that shows what I've been talking about to this point. Out of the total incidents, this is for 2020, this chart is for. So you can see our incidents is 65,000. We only responded to about 2,000 fires. But out of our incident response, 55% were medical. Now understand, to field a fire apparatus with 4 firefighters, fire apparatus costs 1.2 million if you're talking about a ladder truck. 4 firefighters, salaries and benefits will run you about $500,000. To field an EMS ambulance is their apparatus costs about just over $300,000, and 2 paramedics cost you just under $200,000 in salary benefits. So you can see it's twice as expensive to field a fire apparatus to a medical incident than it is to field an EMS apparatus to the same incident. EMS has this lead agency. We are only responding to medical incidents for support. So this is the conversation that the accountants will have, and this is the conversation that we are going to need to counter in the future. Otherwise, I believe our staffing is going to be slashed. That's just an organizational chart. It just shows how we're structured. The only thing I wanted to highlight here is that we are all fire. You will see nothing in this chart except for under executive officer is related to medical. And that medical is related to personnel. That's not our response. This is how I believe we need to change that structure chart. So that would be a chief of medical services and all of the support and structure beneath it. All this is saying is we need to rethink the way we're thinking. That we respond to mostly medical calls, so our organizational chart should show that. As part of this project, I was reaching out, trying to find better ways for us to do things. What I found is a lot of departments have better websites than we do. Our website is kind of atrocious. It's hard to find anything. A lot of departments around the country have websites where all of their services are there. Any information about the fire department is on their website. But then I came across an individual at a conference, and he got me thinking differently. He says, you shouldn't be thinking about websites. You should be thinking about web apps. People use their phones now for computers. They don't use desktop computers anymore. And most of the time when people want our services, they are out from their homes or their offices. They have their phone with them. So I had a vendor do a mock-up of a phone app that we can have. This is a fully working phone app. It's incredible. It's the most incredible thing I've ever seen. You can get any of our services. You can download forms. You can request permits. You can request smoke detectors. It gives you information. So this is something I'm presenting to my administrators as something that we should do. And as you can see at the bottom of the app, it's not only fire, it's police. It also has animal control. And there's an EMS component on it also. The whole goal of this, our concept should be, we should perform well enough to eliminate the need for our services. We don't want to respond to fires. We want to prevent fires. We don't want to respond to medical emergencies. We want to prevent medical emergencies. So that's kind of what the concept should be. We need to work smarter. So consolidate emergency services within the city. our response with EMS and the fire department, we need to kind of consolidate that response so that there's not that divergent of the amount cost of sending resources to the scene. Mobile integrated health services are basically what people call paramedicine. Say you have a surgery and you're a city of Cleveland resident and you're scheduled to return to the clinic a week later just for a checkup. They just want to check your vital signs and see if you have any problems. There's no reason for you to have to go into the clinic. You can have a fire department paramedic come to your house, do your checkup, connect you to the doctor through a mobile app. The doctor can have this short conversation with you. We can go in service, we're done. We're at the resident's side for maybe 15, 20 minutes, and that will result in a revenue stream for us. For the hospital system, it keeps patients out of their hospital system that are not emergent, which is what they want, but they're still providing service. They'll be more than willing to pay for that. So that's kind of one idea that we're kicking around about that. And then all the rest of this is, building tomorrow's workforce with the recruitment and recruiting a diverse workforce, and then creating a competitive moat. One thing as far as expanding our service reach and preventing fires before they come is that we can create a business portion of the fire department where we provide basically risk assessment services to businesses to assess their risk of fire and show them how to reduce that risk. I believe that will reduce their insurance costs, which means they'll be willing to pay for that service. So that's just some of the ideas that we're kicking around right now. This is just a short video on mental health issues in firefighter. I'm just gonna play the first part of the video.
Stress they deal with and the need for mental health awareness. Let's bring in local 4 defender Karen Drew with what she found. Every day, they put their lives on the line to save others. We call firefighters our heroes, praise them for their rescues, their strength, their dedication. But after the flames die down, the fire is gone and the smoke is cleared, there is another battle to fight for these first responders many don't realize.
We suffer from the same challenges the general public does, financial issues, marital issues. Now you compound that with the horror that we see every day, day in and day out. It adds up.
NBC New York partnered with the International Association of Firefighters and sent anonymous surveys to firefighters all across the country. 7,000 responses paint a picture of a culture still trying to cope with mental health and PTSD.
We're supposed to be the tough guys are supposed to be doing the things that nobody else wants to do. But inside, it still hurts. When you see, especially the children.
Captain Dean Pinchik has been with the Detroit Fire Department for 29 years. Most of the time, he avoids talking about all he has seen.
There was one that we had four dead children in the building, and the mother left to go to the store. And when we get there, it was 4 dead children in there.
The captain says the results of the survey are no surprise. Almost all surveyed, 95%, say they experience critical stress on the job. 3/4 of them say it leaves them with unresolved issues. Many have trouble with sleeping and are constantly haunted by memories of bad calls.
There was a time when.
So I just wanted to play that to give you an idea. This is not something that Cleveland is just facing. Firefighters across the country are facing this, mental health illness. Cleveland Division of Fire lost 2 members in 2021 to suicide. So it's something that's always at the top of our mind, and it's something I think that we need to focus on. The remainder of this is just the steps that we're taking in the strategic plan. And then these are the additional steps that we're taking. So like I started this is, we got to change or we're going to go extinct. That's where we're at. That's where we're going to be. We have to face that. And that's what I tried to do with this project. So the project document, I provided it to the city, I provided it to the administration, and hopefully we'll get some change. The last thing I'll say is I'm pretty much at the end of my career. And the spark, it went away, but just doing this project, it has relit the spark for me. And I really want to thank CSU, Robert, and Alexandria for this, because I feel invigorated. So With that, I'll take any questions.
Well, thank you, Anthony. First of all, I wanted to say this is an amazing project. You actually lit a fire within our department at the center. We have a Center for Emergency Preparedness, and our conversations have been around the fact that we need to focus more on developing management and leadership training within the emergency services. I've referenced your project several times in conversations, and we will be harassing you after once we're offline about what's the next step, and kind of tapping into your expertise and this specific application here to how we can address that issue as we move forward, not only in Northeast Ohio, but across the state of Ohio. And I think you've brought a lot of interesting points to the table here. So I want to say thank you for your thorough job, and just really appreciate your dedication to the program and to this project as well. So we're running a little bit behind as far as our next project is concerned. So well, on the Q&A part of things, we'd like to have you, if you do have a Q&A for Anthony, please either direct it to Alexandra or my attention, or possibly reach out to him offline, but we will make sure that we get that feedback to him. This presentation will also be available online afterwards, as far as we will get it eventually up on our websites if you wanted to review it again for more details. But I just want to say thank you, Anthony. Wonderful job, and look forward to the next steps and see how this is received at City Hall moving forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to jump in right into the next project. I'm really excited to bring to the dais here Miss Stephanie Hobbs. Stephanie is with the Cleveland Metropolitan School District, and the CMSD is one of our larger stakeholders. So I want to say thank you for their continued support over the time, and in particular, Stephanie, for your leadership here at the PMA program, and also for your being a recruiter and a champion for our cause, and inviting several people to participate in the program. So your project is on meal audits and staffing standardizations, and so I'd like you to feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Rob and Alexandria. Let me try to share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes, just all you gotta do is just start from the beginning and you're good to go.
Okay, thank you.
It's too much work.
I need more money.
I'm short-staffed.
There's not enough time to get all this done.
It's not in my job description.
I'm overworked and underpaid.
So I'm sure your organizations hear these same sentiments. Good morning, my name is Stephanie Hobbs, and I'm the Director of Operations for the School Nutrition Department with the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. And the title of my presentation is Meals per Labor Hour Audit and Staffing Standardization. So the mission of this project is to improve the staffing model of the School Nutrition Department by using data to determine the staffing requirements at the building level. The goal is to increase productivity and efficiency by improving the appropriate level of staffing at each school. So by placing schools with too much staff into schools that could use more staffing, we will be able to have sufficient staffing that will result in a productive and efficient end product. So the formula will show if there is a need for more staff or not. So I'm going to first start off talking to you a little bit about the School Nutrition Department. So the Cleveland Metropolitan School District has over 37,000 students and close to 100 buildings. I have over 450 kitchen staff employees. So the School Nutrition Department, we served 28,420 lunches per day prior to the pandemic, and then 6,695 during the pandemic. So although we had that significant drop, a lot had to do with the fact that we did remote meals and students were not consistently in the building. But now we've done small things like having themed meals, taste testing new items, talking to kids and staff about nutrition, that had helped us get our number of meals served back on track. Enrollment is steady, but attendance is really variable, which is why we're not back to pre-COVID numbers. So I have to stop this for a second. So I'm going to break from the slides for a minute to give you a more in-depth information about the school nutrition department. So per the direction of the CEO, my staff worked through the pandemic, even during holidays. And my staff's willing spirit allowed them to do this because of the students. They wanted to ensure that the students received nutritious meals. Several of my leadership team and kitchen staff, they got COVID, but they came right back after their quarantine to support. So just as the nations came together, so did school nutrition. So as you know, the supply chain was a global issue, but it was definitely difficult for school nutrition industry. So for us to keep up with menu changes, it was difficult. What we had bidded was no longer offered or being made. So the manufacturers, they narrowed down their items. So trying to be innovative and creative was halted because they no longer had the product. And then costs went up 40%. United States Department of Agriculture was giving us commodity dollars to help purchases, but some vendors didn't give us credit, but instead charged us more. So each problem caused changes that disrupted how the kitchen staff handled their daily routines, causing confusion. Now, if people had concerns before COVID about staffing, imagine the concerns during. People were utilizing the services that were provided by the government. You know, there were the stimulus checks. They gave people more money in their unemployment checks. Many companies started raising their salaries. And we even have crossing guards making $21 an hour with full benefits compared to what we pay our lunch attendants with no benefits. So it's still currently difficult to hire staff, which places a strain on the team and have them questioning even more why they cannot receive additional support in their kitchens. So we have pre-K through 8 and we have high schools. Our pre-K through 8 consists of cooks, managers, and lunch attendants, whereas our high schools is cook, managers, general prep, and cashiers. And our high schools have about 8 to 10 employees compared to our pre-K through 8 who may have about 2, possibly 3. And then our high schools, they serve over 700 students and have increased food options. So they don't have a lunch attendant because the smallest students pretty much need lunch attendants to help them get through the line quickly, to help them open their packages and throw their items away. Now the school has a general enterprise fund that comes from local school taxes, local taxes. School nutrition doesn't get any money from this source. All school nutrition money comes from the United States Department of Agriculture, who sets a price per meal and gives us money based on how many meals we serve. So unfortunately, COVID forced us to borrow from the general fund. So this video here is going to show you the process and how meals are made and served. So even though we have unique challenges in some of our schools, as you saw in the video, where the food was prepared on one floor, but served on another using an elevator, the end result is our students enjoying their meal. We involve them in taste testing, as you can see in the picture, because it's about involving them and getting their feedback. And if they like it, it goes on the menu. Because if the students do not like the meal, they will not eat it. We can't get reimbursed. And without us putting the money back into the enterprise, the program cannot continue. The Council of Great City Schools was an external comparison that I used. They bring together 75 of the nation's largest urban public school systems in a coalition dedicated to the improvement of education for children in the inner cities. The council and its member school districts, they work to help our school children meet the highest standards and become successful and productive members of society. So I selected the council to compare against because their database is broad. They develop key performance indicators, KPIs that we've talked about in our class. The median for all their school districts was 16 for meals per labor hour. And so these are some of the schools they compared against: Cincinnati, Columbus, Pittsburgh, and St. Paul. As you see, their enrollment was similar in size to the Cleveland Metropolitan School Districts. So as the Director of Operations for School Nutrition, I've been approached for the past 4 years asking how we came up with the methodology that if you served over 400 students, you would receive additional support, kitchen support, but would not if you served less than 400 students. So unfortunately, there was no study done to support this statement. There's not enough solid data about how many meals are served per staff. And as you know, data helps. It informs the discussion and goal setting with the team, and it brings information into the conversation. So this project allowed me to gather productivity data whereby I measured productivity internally and externally. So this will help everyone better understand staffing levels with the result of showing increased staffing and productivity. So performance metrics in food services, it measures the productivity, cost efficiency, and service levels of a district's nutritional services. Productivity is broadly assessed by meals per labor hour, which is a standard measure of the industry. So there's no other way to determine if one school deserves more support over another without doing some type of comparing, benchmarking, or using some form of performance measurement. So other operational departments within the Cleveland Public Schools are also dealing with a similar problem, and that they're short staffed in their departments such as transportation, safety and security, and facilities. So the outcome could be a guideline for these departments to follow as well, showing if additional staffing is required or not required at certain schools. So as I stated earlier, the Council of Great City Schools is a database of many urban school districts like Cleveland. They develop key performance indicators. And as I indicated, the median for their comparison was 16 for meals per labor hours, and for school nutrition, we were 13. So I took the productivity rate from the meals per labor hours data, and I used the formula in Excel to come up with the median of 13. So this formula will determine if there's a need for more staff or not at each school. It also will show which schools were high, median, or low in their meal productivity. So this is just a snapshot of how I used the formula in Excel to find the median. Now the next slide, I almost left it out because it was too small to read. So don't pay attention too much to the words, which are just the schools, but pay attention to the colors. I didn't want to talk about colors and then you had no visual or a visual of what I was referencing. So this is pretty much the outcome. What you see in green, these are the schools that were high in their meal productivity. And then the ones in yellow, they were like mid-range. These were ones with median. And then those in orange, they were the schools that had a low meal productivity rate. So just because they're in orange, it doesn't mean my staff is not doing a great job, but unique situations that I will discuss further in the slides could result in why they have a low meal productivity rate. So now Clark Elementary School, they were listed on both Cleveland and the council's list as a school that had a high meal productivity rate. So I wanted to give recognition to Clark in particular, and they also exhibited model characteristics. So I worked with my area supervisors to do a consensus on why they felt the schools with the high meal productivity rate also did well. And some of the things were great customer service. So when students experience a welcoming kitchen, they more than likely will participate in the meal program, which helps reimbursement. And then they're great leaders. The staff has been with the district for many years. They take advantage of the professional development training they are presented and the tools needed to be successful leaders. They're also effective communicators. So say, for instance, they're short staffed and they may have to go down to one serving line, or they may have to make changes in their menu. So they pretty much inform the principals that they're having, they have to change a little bit. And when they do that, the principals are pretty much cooperative, and they bring us volunteers or they bring us teachers to kind of help support us on that day. And then they work together as a team to get the job done, realizing that the priority is ensuring that every student receives a nutritious meal. And then they keep a clean kitchen, which results in a better product and students wanting the meal. And when students want the meal, we can get reimbursed. So if other schools who may be low in their productivity, meal productivity, would model these characteristics, their schools could be more efficient and may not need additional support. So I also have staff engagement and incentive programs that have been implemented to reward schools that are or above the median, and can encourage those schools with low meal productivity to aim higher and keep turnover low. And some of the contests were like best serving line. And then we had perfect attendance. So not just on an individual basis, but the whole staff in the kitchen could not miss a day for a whole month to be rewarded. And if you look closely, the perfect attendance winners, Clark Elementary School. So this is just one metric, and although not complete, it will at least start the conversation from just resource emphasis to productivity and resource emphasis. So as I said, the Council of Great City Schools was just a benchmark for this project. There's other factors that need to be considered. For example, offer versus serve. So we can't just tell a student, here, take this cheeseburger, take this hamburger. We have to allow them to make a choice. And sometimes the principals, they want us to be creative, but they only give the students 15 minutes to eat. So if we have, say, for instance, a potato bowl or something like that, that can be a strain on a two-person school, because we have to give them a choice. Hey, do you want corn with that? Do you want gravy with that? We can't just give them what we feel they should have. And then heat and serve versus scratch cooking. Heat and serve may be okay for a two-person school because you just have an entree and you're just heating it up. But when you get into scratch cooking, cooking our own meals and combining whole ingredients rather than pre-assembled or processed meals and meal components, that can be put a strain on a two-person school. And then, as you saw in the video, serving on a different floor. So for two people, it may be okay if you're serving and preparing on the same floor, but then when you have to involve an elevator that may not work all the time, then that can be a challenge. So the Council of Great City Schools may not have factored all these unique situations into their comparison. But although we have limitations, we still do the best we can. I had robust data from all my schools. I used the standard industry metric, and I compared our data to data from schools of similar size and operations. So my next step is to meet with the union, and they have what's called labor management committee meetings, and we resolve issues with union members. And they were basically some of the people who questioned how they could receive more support. So at this meeting, I would want to start that conversation with them. And then I also would like to have the low meal productivity schools shadow the schools that were high in their productivity rate. And then looking into the data more and figuring out trends and things between schools and the different groups, like what do the orange schools have in common? And then I also want to empower staff to give feedback. So make it a competition, maybe submit recommendations, have them submit recommendations, have a panel vote. And then the best suggestion receives recognition. So those are some of the next steps I would like to get into. And then in summary, the goal is to get everyone above the median from the internal and external data collection that was obtained, and to see this to the end, and hopefully make a way where those schools that may have too many people that have a high meal productivity rate can possibly fill the holes in those schools that feel as though they need more support in the schools with a low meal productivity rate. So, and this will help us avoid any layoffs or maybe affect the budget. We don't have to affect the budget by hiring new people. So again, this is just one metric. As I said, I just touched the surface. It's not complete. There are other layers to factor in, but at least it will start the conversation, and hopefully we can alleviate staff complaints and have more discussion and focus on how to get the work done. So this is some of my leadership team. There would be no me without them. They all help make me make it happen, and they all help make my job easy. Thank you.
You're welcome. Great job. Great job, Stephanie. I really love how you've integrated the concept of empowering your employees, the concept of using data to try to inform your decisions, and then also for future planning as far as, okay, how are we going to lay this out? To me, I never realized what a major role the concept of nutrition is in the CMSD schools, where a lot of times these kids, this is going to be their only option to get a healthy meal, or even sometimes get a meal, you know, through in the day. And so it's such a critical aspect of the services that you provide within the school district. So the allocation of those finite resources is really crucial. And I appreciate the fact that you are, you know, looking at it at a different perspective and getting outside your comfort zone to try to find ways to make you all as efficient and effective as you possibly can. And also the fact that you're empowering and embracing, celebrating your workers. I really love that find ways to celebrate them and to promote their work and embrace their contributions, you know, and make sure that they're part of the voice. They have a voice in this, and that they have a way to potentially find some solutions to these problems. So I love it. Overall, it's a wonderful, wonderful project, and I wish you the best of luck as you go about implementing this. So, Alexandra, is there any questions or feedback from the group at all yet? We didn't get a chance to do that in the first project, but feel free to send any questions, comments, feedback through the Q&A link there at the bottom, that Q&A box, and we'll make sure we get that to Stephanie.
Yeah, so looks like we have just a comment coming in. So Stephanie, your colleague Ashley says, great job, Stephanie. I believe your project will start the conversation in other operations departments that have similar issues. So feel free to keep sending in any questions, comments you have. Also, we chatted the link to provide feedback for Stephanie directly to Stephanie. So make sure that you fill that out. Anyone can complete that, so you don't have to be a Public Management Academy participant. I know Stephanie would probably appreciate that as she goes to write her paper. I don't see any other questions or comments. I'll wait a few more moments before closing it out. Last call. All right, I don't see anything.
Great. Well, I just want to say thank you, Stephanie. Wonderful project. And once again, thank you for your continued support for our programs overall. Continue to send folks our way. And I just look forward to seeing how this project is going to have a future impact in the organization, and kind of see how your leadership continues to grow over time. So just really appreciate our partnership, and go from there. I think there's a question that came through, right, Alexandra?
Yeah, coming in hot. All right. So how can the general community assist in your cause?
What do they mean by general community?
So whoever asked, you can provide clarification on what you mean by general community. Perhaps maybe the folks outside of CMSD. They put that, but I'm just adding that.
I know. It's probably more of a internal issue as far as staffing. I mean, we can probably use people to support us with sending us people our way, because we're having a hard time hiring people with, as I mentioned, because of, you know, different organizations raising their salaries. So we're in competition with different places that are paying their people more money than we are. So we even have places like Arby's and Aldi's and Amazon. And so we are having a hard time hiring, you know, people to work in our kitchens. So we can use that support from outside.
Yeah, so they followed up with possible volunteer opportunities.
Yes, and we can definitely use that. You can always reach out to the principal at a school that's close in your neighborhood or just in general. And we can always use volunteers to help us in our kitchens, you know, as far as, especially with us losing lunch attendants, because a lot of them are elderly. And so with this COVID, they didn't really want to come and be in that environment. And so we can always use volunteers to help us, especially at our pre-K through 8, get the students through the lines and help them open their packages and just be that smiling face. Because I think when I was coming up, lunch attendants were somebody you just wanted to see, you wanted to hug, you wanted to talk to. And so just to bring that back where the kids can have somebody that they can, you know, be happy to see would be very helpful.
All right, Alexandra, any other comments?
Just a follow-up thank you for the work that you do. And I agree, you do an amazing job. And we are fortunate to work with you and see the impact that you make at CMSD.
Thank you.
Well, welcome back, everybody, from break. And I hope you had a chance to kind of get the blood circulating again or refill your coffee like I did. And I also want to say that we're off to a great start. I want to say thank you to and congratulations to both Anthony Luke from the Cleveland Fire Department and also Stephanie Hobbs from the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. Great way to kick it off. I knew that those are going to be two strong projects and two great leaders in our cohort. So thank you for your project presentation and your leadership throughout the last couple of years in both PMA and Leadership Academy. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce our next presenter. Mr. Trent Ross is the Deputy Director over at the Rocky River Public Library. Trent actually joins us from PMA number 6, cohort number 6. At the time, he wasn't, there's some transitions, some other things going on at the library, so he wasn't able to present. But one of the nice things that we do is have an opportunity to have have some flexibility in our schedule and allow the projects to come through when they are ready to rock and roll. So I'm really excited to hear about what Trent has prepared for us today, because I think his project is very timely with what we're seeing now with the Great Resignation and also the silver tsunami as it affects the public sector in general with trying to develop and retain talent. So without further ado, I want to pass the baton over to Mr. Trent Ross. Trent, thanks for joining us today.
Rob. As Rob said, my name is Trent Ross. I'm the Deputy Director over at the Rocky River Public Library, and my project is succession planning and establishing a pipeline. This is something that I don't think, at least in my experience, libraries have always done very well. A lot of times in libraries, your first job in management is a librarian, that has been hired into management with no real or limited experience in management. A lot of those management positions in libraries require an MLIS, a librarian professional degree, but that degree doesn't provide management classes, budgeting, or HR experience or knowledge. So a lot of times we're asking new managers to learn on the job that might have leadership experience, maybe, or limited management, but for the most part, they're learning on the job, and not always are we developing them other than learning by experience. So this is really something that we've seen, let's see if we can pass there, a opportunity for. This was really highlighted for me when we had an open position in 2019. It was a vacancy that was open for about 4 months. The most experienced candidate that we end up going with had less than 5 years, a good bit less than 5 years management experience, and it was over 5 years ago, and they were by far the most experienced candidate. And like a lot of librarians, as they said, their management experience was mostly from that learn on the job, and not really a dedicated training and development into management. So they not only had to learn the department, the library, coming in as a new employee, but they still needed to develop as a manager in that position because they didn't have depth of experience. But we knew this wasn't something that, this wasn't how it had to be, because we had a open position a little bit earlier that we filled immediately. It was the only position in the library where we had an assistant manager in the same department. It was our biggest department by far. So we had assistant manager and manager. And that assistant manager had served in that role 7 years and was able to move into that manager role when the manager retired seamlessly. They knew what to expect from the position. They knew the library, they knew the department. Of course, it's a new role, so there's a little bit of adjustment, but they're not waiting a year, year and a half to get that experience and comfort in the library. They're almost immediately there. They're taking on, they have a vision and putting it into place. So that's really where, like, we knew we didn't have to always go through this long transition period of getting a management person that is, and building them from a librarian into a manager. We knew there was a process we could put into place. So my vision really is that seamless transition along the management pipeline, where you don't feel when you lose an experienced person that all the institutional knowledge is going out the way and you're spending the next year rebuilding. To do this, the mission really is to retain management track professionals through establishing supervisor positions that provide the experience and training required to fill future management level vacancies. So provide a stepping stone from a librarian position to a management position where we're providing the development in that time. They're working closely with the supervisor, or sorry, the manager, to really gain the experience and knowledge that they'll need in that next step. So we started off by doing a SWOT analysis, assessing how the library at that time was performing in regard to succession planning. We had some really experienced staff. And as an institution, one thing I think we really did excel at was we had strong support for professional development. One of the reasons I'm here today, and something that we have really tried to support throughout the library, is developing and spending the time and money to make sure that our staff is getting the training they need, not only in their current position, but in where they want to go in their career. However, one of the weaknesses we do have is, even though we do support professional development, there wasn't always a specific plan or focus on developing staff into management. So if a staff really took the initiative, we would support it, but we didn't always seek out to fill that gap. Additionally, our organization, like many libraries in my experience, is very flat, and there's not, for most positions, a clear successor. If a manager leaves, maybe someone in the department would be interested, but they wouldn't necessarily have the experience or training to fill that gap immediately. And there's no designated successor for any of those positions except for that one. So with that, we have organizational knowledge that just leaves the library because there's not someone that's specifically gaining that. They might have written some decent procedures, and that's a strength, but you can only do so much of that, where working closely together with that manager will definitely help us retain more of that institutional knowledge. So there's a lot of opportunities for us that we saw in engaging and motivating current staff in their career development. We show that investment and interest in them. Hopefully they'll be staying longer because they see that path forward in their own career. Additionally, if we create these supervised positions, not only do they see that path forward, but we see a way to allocate some of the duties that managers are doing that they don't really need to. It's something that a librarian or a different position we didn't feel would be appropriate for them, but if we raise the responsibilities into the supervisor position, it is something that we can ask them to contribute or allocate into that position. Scheduling is one of those. Scheduling takes up a lot of time here sometimes, and it's not something that we have to have a manager doing. We could have someone assist with that. Additionally, we want to give things more than that, but it's a good opportunity of freeing up a manager's time so they can focus more strategically. Of course, we'll reduce the knowledge loss when experienced managers leave as well. Threats, like a lot of things, it's budget. In making a position with more responsibilities is a higher paid position as well. And if we're giving them duties, someone else has to take the duties that they were doing. We can't just give more and expect everything to be done. So there's definitely threat there. And managers, we talked and been talking about this for a little while, this idea of building more depth into the library, but still we want to make sure that we're very intentional in communicating with management why we're doing this. It's not a threat to them. We're not trying to push anyone out, and we're not looking to, replace them. It's not a threat to them. But we want to be aware that if we're not very clear in how we communicate this out, there's possibilities that it could be misinterpreted. One thing I really enjoyed when going through the Public Management Academy was the logic plan. I enjoyed how the progression shown in the logic plan kind of walks you through a project. And for me, I always kind of start with the outcome, not always, but in this case, because I know what we wanted to accomplish, but it helps me align what activities we really need to get there. So the outcome is that we are engaging staff in their growth within the organization, retaining them here, building them into what we hope will be new management when our current managers leave or retire. We want them to feel supported and engaged in those roles, and they are actually getting, not only are they there in their career growth, but they're getting the training and the development they need when they're there. So to do that, we need to start by assessing the needs of the departments. We need these positions to be viable and useful for both the manager and the supervisor. So we need to get the feedback from the management to make sure that we are building those specifically so they're helpful for the departments. We need to create the job descriptions. We need to post and we need to hire. And then if we want to be really intentional about how we're developing people so that they are getting that training, they need to train, they need the support and career development. And one thing that we really wanted to do was create a development plan, a really intentional way of plotting out how do we get from librarian to supervisor to manager. What do they need to make that seamless transition? The impact, the large scope is that vision, seamless transitions, and supporting our goal that we have as a library to be a organization that's recognized regionally as one that supports career development, and that we have internally a culture of continual development. It's something that we have outside of this project been working towards, but this really fits within that and will continue to foster that and hopefully be a draw and recognition in the region. Okay. So I created 3 goals that I hoped would help me move along this project. The first is very simple. Create the 3 department level supervisor positions by last June. The second was actually something that going forward into how we're measuring in the future, I think I'm going to change, but the intent was to measure, are we filling future vacancies with internal applicants? And I had thought at the time, if we're looking at time it takes to fill a vacancy, that might inform how well we're filling with internal applicants, or we're filling with really qualified external applicants. Because of course, there'll be times where it'll be either really necessary or helpful to have external candidates. And so I didn't want to be unreasonable to say everything's going to be internal candidate. However, this project really doesn't focus on any portion of the hiring outside external process. So going forward, I'm going to transition this as I measure progress into the percent of vacancies that are filled by internal applicants, because we're not really changing any of the external process to speed it up. So something I'm going to address moving forward. And the third goal is that development plan. I really want to make sure that we have that 3-year development plan in place by March. So starting in fall of 2022, we actually did get this started. We started meeting with the department managers. Like I said, we had kind of discussed this in various forms for a few years prior to this, kicking around as an idea. But we did actually get some momentum in the fall of 2022. We had an extended absence around that time that really highlighted the need to have someone in that department that can step in, has that knowledge, has the ability to kind of serve as a replacement in those periods as well. So we met with the department managers, communicated the idea and the purpose behind the project, but also gathered their feedback. We wanted cohesion within these supervisor positions, but we knew that there'd be some unique needs for the 3 departments. We also needed to make sure it was in the budget. If it wasn't going to get into the 2021 budget, we weren't going to be able to make the project work. Without the money, we weren't going to be able to do it. So we worked on that in the fall of 2020, so that in 2021 we could begin the project. We did end up finalizing the job descriptions in our library. We had to have those approved by the board, and we did see all of them approved by January 2021 at the latest. There were circumstances that made us move a little quicker with one than the other ones, as we really wanted to, we had reasons to try to hire for that supervisor position quicker than the rest. And it would also kind of serve as a model for the next two. In case there's anything we can make adjustments, we had one more month to do that. It wouldn't have been the end of the world. By April 2021, we had posted and filled each one of these positions internally. So our organization chart prior to this, it was a very flat organization. As you can see, we have one assistant manager, and that was a department that is by far the largest. However, all these managers plus most of administration typically come through just the librarians. A lot of these are degreed positions that require a librarian's degree. So the departments that have the librarians have no step between manager and librarian. So that's where we frequently get managers that are coming straight from librarians without the experience in management and aren't getting that in the position, nor are they getting that in school. So this is what our organization chart looks like now. This is just for departments under me. I'm not looking at the library as a whole. And we build that step in between. So there's that continued progression along the pipeline that we're really going to invest and train and provide experiences for those positions, so they're ready to step into that management role should the opportunity arise. So that moves us on to the development plan. This element still technically hasn't been fully developed. We had really good momentum making the positions and moving forward with that because we saw that need immediately. But it kind of gives the danger of waiting for the best time to do something. It kind of gets pushed down the road. And I was really hoping to have it done for this project presentation. And it should be done in the next week or two, but I didn't quite get it in this time. So this is still kind of the draft model. We're nearly there, but I'm waiting some feedback because I do think it's important that the managers and the supervisors have some feedback into their department's program or their department's development and their own development, what they really think is going to be important as they move forward as well. And this is for specifically development into that management role. Of course, there'll be some, development beyond that as well that we want to encourage, both as library professionals and as a public service, customer service organization. And the development plan here is very small, and I've broken down the next slide, so it's a little bit more readable. The objective of this plan really is to create a path to gaining the management core competencies. We're using Ohio Library Council's core competencies to establish that. We're not going to reinvent the wheel and make our own. We're going to use ones that have been created for libraries across Ohio. We also want to communicate clear expectations. This is a position that maybe they don't end up becoming the manager or don't want to go that direction, but we want to make sure that they have the training and the development along that path. And so the expectations are clear for the manager, the supervisor, and the library as a whole, and create some accountability. If we put it as a plan, 3-year plan, and actually track the plan, we know that we're not becoming stagnant and just putting it on a piece of paper and saying, this is what we want to do, but not really making ourselves accountable to it. So I broke this out into 3 sections. The first one was a basic training session. The focus here is on utilizing high quality resources that are mostly low expense. NEORLS is a Northeast Ohio regional library system, partially state funded library member organization. They provide some really high quality training for library professionals, for libraries that, a lot of it is about the library profession, but some of it is also really high quality for management. So it speaks to how management in libraries can specifically work. Some are unique circumstances at times. So there is some real nice value in there. They do have new training and webinars and that they offer frequently. So this is something that we'll need to continue to reevaluate as we go. But they do have a couple that are perennially offered. CSU, Public Management Academy, is something that I have found to be really beneficial. I've really enjoyed, and others in our organization that have taken it have really enjoyed. So for the project management and the communication portion of this plan, we really do see the benefit of encouraging more of our staff to take advantage of that. The second breakout is internal leadership activities. So not just training, give them some practical experience in things that they'll need to know before they become managers. Some of this is working directly with the manager and assisting them on processes that they would not normally be a part of. Participating in an interview panel, reviewing and preparing the annual department budget, participating in the training of the new employee. These things are still managed by the department manager, but involving the supervisor in the process will give them some experience and knowledge of how it's handled so that they can take that into future endeavors. Additionally, we want them to have leadership opportunities. Our library has a few cross-functional teams, and leading one of those teams will give them the ability to lead a project and direct individuals in that project without having actual direct management experience. Typically, they get that the skills needed by directing that team. Additionally, along that same route, really taking large scale projects, and this is something that if they're in the PMA, they'll have to do as well, but manage a large project within their department. This goes along to reallocating some of the duties that managers do, but they don't have to necessarily. So instead of the manager overseeing every project under the direction of the manager, the supervisor can, for example, oversee the collection development strategy and execution. So as long as they are, coordinating amongst themselves, this is something that the supervisor could assist the manager with. And we really wanted to show the importance and support external leadership activities as well. Succession planning very much obviously is about growing within the library. But I think it's important to recognize that not everyone is going to stay with the library. And as long as we're growing the profession and sending trained supervisors out to become managers in the region, we're benefiting the profession as a whole, and it's going to build our reputation in the region and hopefully benefit us long term. So recognizing that to do that, networking and professional growth outside the library is going to really benefit both the library and the individual themselves. Leadership Ohio is something through the state Library of Ohio offered annually that people can apply to. And we have had a few individuals in the library go through it and say it's been just a wonderful experience for their career to get motivated by profession and meet people outside their library and learn from them. So we're bringing in ideas from outside our library too. We're not just being insular through having our own ideas brought up and regurgitated. We're bringing in ideas from the outside as well. Additionally, participating in professional organizations is something that is important for the profession itself and for our library for the same reasons. So Ohio Library Council, ALA, NEO, RLS, participating on committees and in those organizations in a meaningful way. We do want to provide the opportunity for these supervisors really to do that. This is something that we actually encourage other staff to do as well, but making it more of a priority for a position that is designated as a leadership position. So I wanted to measure, based on the original goals, where we're at now, and then continue to assess these moving forward. So we've actually had 2 vacancies in this last year in management level positions. Both positions ended up being filled internally by supervisors. And this is where in the future I want to measure if we're filling those vacancies internally or if we're instead the speed in which we fill them. Because one position was filled immediately and met that criteria. That supervisor had been in position for about 11 months when they took over as manager. It was a very smooth transition, worked very well. The other position was filled in just under 3 months, so technically didn't meet the criteria I had set at the beginning, but that supervisor had been in the position as supervisor less than 6 months, weren't 100% confident at the time. And so we wanted to make sure we went through a more thorough procedure filling that position to make sure we were gaining the best possible candidate for that position. Ended up being the supervisor, and I'm extremely happy with the outcome of that. But it was quicker than we had anticipated filling that position, the management position. Retention, it's a little bit too early to measure. My goal is to, that since these supervisors see the path forward and that growth that they're staying within 3 years, that we're investing in them in that time. Currently, we're on track for that, but this is something that we're going to continue to measure going forward to make sure that we're really meeting the goals and engaging these positions. The retention is something that we measure regularly as an organization. Finally, develop the 3-year plan by March. It's not probably going to happen by the 1st, but it will happen in March. Finally, we don't want this to be, I really don't want this to be something that we do and then forget about. This is something that we want to continue to improve. That development plan, as you saw, doesn't have any mechanism in the plan for tracking it. It is just a written plan. However, we are implementing a new HRIS currently. We're starting with payroll in January and February, but in March, we are anticipating implementing the training and development module of the HRIS. So I'm going to work closely with the human resources generalist, who's been a huge benefit throughout this entire process. And we've really worked on this very closely throughout the entire time. But to use that training and development module in Paylocity to track and make sure and hold us accountable to that development plan. We're not just putting it on a piece of paper, saying this is what it is and setting it aside for 3 years. We're actively assessing and tracking that progress. Finally, we understand that training and needs for managers changes. So review that development plan annually to make sure that we're achieving the goals that we want to, and the trainings are still relevant, offered, and are the best trainings for the staff that we want. And finally, like I said, continue to track retention and the ability to fill management vacancies internally. Questions?
Thank you, Trent. I want to say thank you. Great job. I like the fact of that you all are being strategic, thoughtful, intentional in this process. It seems to me like there's a trend lately that public sector organizations are, it used to be like, well, it's like when people leave, we just figure out how to fill them those positions and we'll just kind of take it as it comes. But with the silver tsunami, and obviously now we have this great resignation that we're dealing with, those two things have really brought it to leaders' attention that they have to be very thorough and intentional and create a path, for their employees to matriculate through the system. So, and also from an employee perspective, from my perspective, I look at it and say, hey, if I work at the Rocky River Library, they're going to invest in me personally, and that I have a path, to continue to grow and advance. And it's basically, up to me if I want to take that opportunity. And even if they do decide to leave or have other opportunities, their time with you has been well spent because you invested back to them. So I just want to say congratulations. And it was definitely worth the wait. I'm glad you came back to present today. And thanks for coming. Alexandra, is there any feedback in the Q&A section?
Nothing yet, but we'll wait a moment or so and see. So feel free to send in your questions or comments. Again, you can navigate to the little Q&A box and just type in any questions or comments you have for Trent. And then if you haven't already, make sure that you completed the Google form, providing any feedback that we will privately send to Trent.
So while we wait for any kind of feedback, I do have a question for you, Trent. How has this been received, the plan been received internally? I mean, is there a lot of positive feedback from folks? Has it changed the culture, or have you noticed anything just about the internal workings of the library because of this?
I mean, I don't think culture-wise it's probably changed everything by any means. It's been in progress for a while, but we've only had the supervisors for a year, and that's a long thing to change. I do think we've done a lot in the last 5 years to try to create that culture of supporting development. And I do think a lot of people in the library recognize that we are willing to support and send people to trainings and opportunities. But this, I think, has been well received within the departments because we did have a lot of staff that were motivated and engaged and do want to advance in their career. And they were happy where they were, but they knew at some point they were going to have to leave to get that next step in their career. And they might still have to. It depends, how long managers stay. But we had several applicants that were interested in those supervisor positions. So we were very lucky that we had that interest and those staff already. We didn't have to go out and find them and bring them in. We had motivated staff. So the ones that have moved into this position have really, I think, found it beneficial. And like I said, of the 3, 2 of them have already become managers in the library. That flow worked out very well for us, even though one of them took a little longer. And so we have had since 2 more supervisors come into those positions. So there's that process is already working for us. I really want to get this development plan out so it's a little bit more intentional of that development over time, but I've been very happy with how it's working out so far. And I think both the managers and the supervisors have found benefit into the roles and kind of offloading some of their offloading some of their duties onto those positions, freeing up a little bit of time for really focusing on development of staff and more strategic planning.
I really like the concept of, keeping their talent in the building, and trying to find ways to give them opportunities to grow. It seems like a lot of organizations will be like, they'll hire somebody, they think they're the best thing since sliced bread, and then next thing you know, that person is stagnant or doesn't have an opportunity to advance within the organization, or if they feel they have to hire outside, and then they get stale and leave, and then you've lost all that institutional knowledge. So I believe that, when you referenced that earlier in your presentation, that's a key point to have that. That's such a, I'm not sure if we can actually track that or measure that impact, but I definitely think it's a huge loss, for someone that understands the culture and has a really good background in how the operations work. And then because they don't see a path, they decide to go somewhere else. And those organizations, where they go, they benefit from it and they take advantage of it. But you all are stuck holding the bag because you're investing in them, and then, or took that time to hire them and kind of get them groomed, and then you don't get the benefit of, the next level up. So I really appreciate that you all are being more strategic and thoughtful in that process. And it's really neat to see. And I also want to say thank you for your support of our programs. The Rocky River Public Library is, quickly becoming one of our top, sponsors. And we have three people, somewhere in that range for the new one coming up, the cohort starting in March. So I just want to say thank you for your continued support, and let us know how we can help you as you all grow in your individual roles and the agency, as a whole. So
You'll be able to judge if I was accurate, because 3 of them were supervisors. So
I'm sure they're going to be great.
Oh, they will. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Alexandra, anything?
Doesn't look like we have any questions or comments. If there's something that you want to just privately relay to Trent, you can either send it to us or you can just include that in that evaluation form.
Yes. Well, I want to say thanks again to Trent for coming and joining us today. For the participants that are here, please do fill out that evaluation for him. He is still in the process of completing his written report, so he'll need that feedback. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the day 1 of our Public Management Academy project presentations for cohort number 7. For those of you that missed the announcement before lunch, we were supposed to have 2 presentations this afternoon, Dave and Alana. Unfortunately, Alana will not be able to present today, so she'll be presenting with the next cohort in, I believe, the summer in July. So we'll get her back on the schedule soon. So anyway, today we'll be concluding our presentations with Dave Boss over at the City of Lakewood, and he will be presenting a presentation on the current parking situation in Lakewood and updating on a lot of their strategic plans around those initiatives. So Dave, take it away.
Well, thank you. Hopefully everybody can hear me and see my screen, I think. All right. So what a great topic to dive into. It's one of the kind of the central tenets of my work every day here in the city of Lakewood. It is trying to improve our parking management. And it's an extremely contentious topic. I'll explain a little bit maybe why the environment kind of is a little more extreme here in Lakewood than maybe in other communities. But it's something that we have kind of I'm taking kind of a multi-pronged approach to try to improve at least a little bit. And so that's what I'm going to get into here. So. All right, so where I started at the beginning of our session here is just identifying parking as the topic. It is an extremely critical issue within the city of Lakewood. It's been a huge topic probably over the last 20 years. There have been multiple studies, which I'm going to go through here in a minute. In terms of how to improve parking, we have had some kind of incremental improvements, but still we rely on code that that's at least 30 or 40 years old and sometimes goes back to 1960. Our infrastructure is predominantly coin only, and we have an extremely small weekday only parking enforcement staff. And so a lot of limited resources to address a kind of a growing monster of a problem. And so the initial outcomes that I kind of started with, I knew we needed to look at some kind of a transition plan to replace our coin only metering and move towards something, more contemporary digital that allows us to a little more dynamic management. I also needed to address, or at least get into a process for on-street parking permits. There are several areas in Lakewood that require permits, but in talking to the folks that have been here at City Hall for 20 years or more, there is no formal process in terms of how you designate or remove a permit area in the city. They've just always been there, apparently forever, and will be there into perpetuity unless we address it. There's also a kind of a growing, anytime you have parking frustration, especially among residents, the idea of a residential parking permits always kind of rears its ugly head. And that is a very high risk kind of an initiative to take on. And so we'll dive into that briefly. Parking enforcement, I'm going to look at our hours and staffing. That allows you to implement a lot of things. If you can't enforce it, it's probably not going to be worth implementing. And so that obviously needs to look at. And then those three things obviously all have implications for our code and legislation and updates and adoption by City Council. So looking back on the background, why does parking, frankly, why does it suck here in Lakewood? So this is just as an old map, and you can see, so this map is actually from 1912. And so Lakewood was built out, and I'll use that term in terms of, you can see the parceling, the roads, all those roads are still here today. A majority of the parcels, you can see the larger ones, they've only gotten smaller from there. So this is 1912. So this is about, just 3 or 4 years after the introduction of the Model T as kind of personally owned automobiles were kind of coming online. Lakewood already had the density that we have today. And so, Lakewood was built for density and for mass transit. We used to have 2 streetcar lines, an electric train up on Clifton, and then the nickel plate railroad that would come through, that all served residents coming, going as far west as Chicago, as far east as New York, and to downtown Cleveland. And so in the pictures at the bottom, you can see that's Detroit Avenue in 1912 with the streetcars there. A handful of cars are starting to show up, but there's not a whole lot of them because the predominant transportation for residents was either their feet, a streetcar, or the horse-drawn carriage there on the right. That's also from a house there on Detroit in 1912. And so if I kind of pulled that forward to today and the environment that we're dealing with, so the top chart is this chart here shows you the number of vehicles that are estimated to be in Lakewood and the change from 2000 to basically now, as most recent, the census data I have. And as I walk down through this, you can see that, we're moving in the wrong direction in terms of cars. And that may be the natural progression of all communities. It's just the impact here in Lakewood, based on the environment, based on the dense street network, has a much higher impact than other places. 37,901 cars. That is almost 1 car for 90% of our population 18 and above. That's more than 1.43 cars per household. And then you can see the change in jobs. There's fewer jobs here in Lakewood, and those that drive to work alone, that carpool, that use public transit, and then the travel time to work is increasing. And so basically the dependence on cars is going up, and that's not a good sign. If I compared this to some other major metro areas, you could see Lakewood's density. It is one of the most dense cities between New York and Chicago. Our density is higher than Seattle, and it's kind of up there close to Washington, D.C. But look at our vehicles per household, the age of housing, and then the percentage of commuters. We've got a much higher vehicle per household than most of those major metro areas. Our housing stock is significantly older. And what that tells you is older housing predominantly has a lack of off-street parking options. While our code, that was written 30, 40 years ago requires every house to have a garage or some off-street parking space, we have an awful lot of nonconformities in homes that don't have garages, don't have even driveways. And so street parking becomes a premium. And then you can see that, our comparison of the people that drive versus using public transit, based on our density, we have a horrible record in comparing to other major metro areas that have other options. And so how did I get to the objectives? Let's look at just really quickly kind of how the studies have played out over the last 20 years and those big issues that have come out of the city's been through 3 major parking studies. We started in 2005, and you can really see kind of, the things that are highlighted in red, those recommendations started to highlight issues, looking at payment methods, enforcement hours, staffing of enforcement, and residential permits. If I jump that to 2007, and then a 2010 update to that, there were several things that were done. There were new meters that were put in. The rates were changed a little bit. They actually moved parking enforcement from Public Works into the police department, which made it a little bit more effective. But those issues have kind of remained on the right-hand side: enforcement hours, staffing, residential permits, and then shared parking. This idea of shared parking came up about 10 years ago. If I carried that through the last set of studies, at the bottom is the ones that I've had done myself in 2018 and 2020. You have the same issues coming up again and again and again. And now the issue of payment method has come back up again because people don't want to use coins. Some do, but a lot of people are looking for, especially there was a pretty significant coin shortage over the last year, and that caused some stress for folks. And so these issues, if I then bounced payment method, enforcement hours, staffing, permitting, and shared parking off of our community vision or our master plan, there are some areas in economic development and mobility and connectivity that I can kind of pull out. The sharing of information, proactive code enforcement, minimizing the impact of late night commercial activity through enforcement design, using surface parking efficiently, those types of things that, the community has said that it wants to move in this direction. If I applied those to these issues that have been consistently identified, this is where I kind of come to a more refined look at the outcomes for this project. So those are the issues. And then the red sub-bullets underneath those are the things I pulled out of the vision. And so I kind of took the initial outcomes that I started with, and then when I really got into the kind of the meat and potatoes of putting this together, the 4 desired outcomes are: we need a transition plan that takes the meters to a contemporary digital contactless payment method and management system. We need to look at doing a pilot for some kind of public-private shared parking partnership program. And then we need to look at recommendations for parking enforcement hours and staffing, and then some kind of a formal process for on-street parking permitting. And so just through the background, there was a little bit of refinement in terms of the outcomes. If I threw that into a logic model, like we've seen as part of this, that those outcomes or those outputs are all in the middle. And then you can kind of extrapolate the activities and the resources on the left-hand side, and then look towards those outcomes and those impacts on the right-hand side. And those are basically, you're woven into your process. And we're looking at, better delineation of commercial and residential parking spaces and zones on our commercial corridors, a dynamic management that we can change payment rates based on times and demand, looking at expanding off-street capacity through the use of private lots and that public-private kind of partnership, and then looking for a process for street permits and more efficient and responsive enforcement on that far right-hand side in terms of those impacts that we're looking to get out of this. Strengths and weaknesses, Some of our strengths do lie in our setup. We do have two very strong commercial corridors in Madison and Detroit Avenue. They've got meters, they've got marked spaces. There is an extremely high demand for on-street space, as I mentioned. And so that's both commercial and unfortunately residents. And so there's always that demand that you have out there. You know, the right of way and the meters and everything is owned by the city. So we don't necessarily have to start working with a whole bunch of people and different landowners and all the, and in terms of implementing solutions. And so that is a strength and kind of simplifies the process. The weaknesses that we deal with, we do have out of date coin meters. They're obsolete. In fact, the company and we're unable to repair them anymore. And so there's features like little free time buttons and stuff like that, that when they break, we can't fix them. And that's a source of frustration for residents. They're also labor intensive. Your parking enforcement has to carry around, you know, these huge bins to collect all the quarters, dimes, and nickels all the time. And we can't change the pricing on the meters. It's set. And so you can't adjust it to demand, you know, in terms of those different timeframes. So there's opportunities out there. There is some inconsistency in space marking and designation out there. We could clean that up for people to make it more evident in terms of where, you know, the delineation of parking spaces more efficient on our corridors. We could look at some private lots that just sit empty from 8 p.m. until midnight because the business is closed. And if you park there, you'll get towed, but no one's using that space. That space could be used for public parking if we could figure that out in terms of a partnership. The dynamic pricing is a huge thing. The demand is there. And just like a lot of other services, you can start to put a value on, you know, public parking and increase revenues, you know, and kind of apply a little bit of market sense towards on-street spaces and maybe push out some demand and spread it out a little bit more. So it's not so concentrated in specific areas because the parking's free right now after 6 p.m. So it's kind of like the wild, wild west out there. Also, you know, a digital system provides real-time visibility of that demand and the use, not only to us in terms of managing rates, but, you know, an app-based system, which I'm going to get into here in a second, can show users where parking is full. And so it helps direct and wayfind people as well. The threats out there, not everybody has a smartphone. We've been learning that constantly. And, you know, as much as kind of the digital technology continues to march on, you have to remember the people that don't have that access. And you have to work to provide them the best access as possible. Resident and business expectations are always extremely high. And you really have to be careful in terms of, especially in like residential permit programs, in terms of what those expectations can result in terms of the next bullet, which is poor parking behavior. You definitely can make behavior worse through certain programs. And so you have to be really conscious of that. And then always, as a municipality, budget constraints, and you have to be a good steward of public dollars. So if I get to our final SMART objectives, kind of out of all those outcomes and looking at strengths and weaknesses, I really just applied times to each of these things. And so I'm going to go to what's called a plan of action and milestones at the end that'll kind of lay out each of these objectives over time. That'll give you a little bit better idea in terms of sequencing. But we're going to attack the digital management system and new meters first and work that as a transition plan through the mayor. And then we're going to look at that public-private shared parking partnership program towards the end of the spring, maybe try to get something like that in place by late summer. And then the last two things, the parking enforcement and the designation and removal of on-street zones, those are really kind of, they're a little more optional, and we need to look at more recommendation or feasibility studies. And so if I were to tie all these things together kind of quickly, in terms of the overarching kind of intent is that, you know, the contemporary management and dynamic pricing and payment options, we need to get that in first. We need to look at increasing our pay to park off-street capacity. If we looked at it in, you know, parking enforcement, we need to look at that's really about applying value and responsive enforcement to our on-street during high demand timeframes. And then the last one for that permit zone is really to address a process gap, but there is a lot of risk in that because you have to address the true impacts of demand. So I'm going to go through each of these objectives quickly, trying to be conscious of the time here. But, you know, really for that digital management system and new meters, that if you looked at the actions kind of in the middle there, the transition plan and those steps, we've inventoried the parking, and the red steps are the ones that we're working on right now. Really, you know, as you go through this on the right-hand side, you can see kind of a progression of the pictures. You do the inventory of what's out there. You work on the zone design, and that's with this online company called Park Mobile that runs the app. Is you basically take all those spaces and you put them into zones, and then you work on the implementation, and that implementation takes the form of basically this virtual layer on the physical environment that people see through, you know, signage and stickers on meters and then on their app. And so the public information is huge behind this, because even though it's all city owned, rolling something like this out is really important to have the right products, you know, something like little wallet cards that businesses can hand out, having the right engagement up front. You know, city council's involved, the Chamber of Commerce, our local CDC and business associations are all involved in this before it gets rolled out. And then we have the broad engagement that comes in through getting that word out. There are some restraints and constraints at the top, and I'll talk to those here in a little bit. But first, I wanted to show you just a quick 30-second video on what Park Mobile is if you're not familiar with it. So hopefully everybody can hear this.
Looking for a smarter way to pay for parking? Download the Park Mobile app. The Park Mobile app lets you easily pay for parking right from your mobile device. You'll even get alerts when your time is about to expire, so you can extend your time. When you park at a Park Mobile location, find the zone number for your spot. It will be located on the stickers and signs that you will see around the parking meters. Next, select the amount of time you'd like to park in that spot. Confirm your information and touch the Start Parking button. Park Mobile, a smarter way to park.
So Park Mobile is a common company that's used in a ton of cities. Columbus uses it, Toledo uses it, and so they're very flexible. It takes that process. You have to learn how to implement it and put that layer on top of it. We had an opportunity to pilot this. It wasn't planned, but in August of 2021, we had some kiosks at some municipal lots that just failed. They up and stopped working. And so a little different than I would have probably approached it in terms of, you know, as a compressed timeline. We were losing revenue. We didn't, you know, the lots were basically free, and that's a public expectation that you don't want to solidify and then have to fight against after that. We had to go from one service provider and a contract and space marking and signage setup to a whole new one. Reinstalled some meters to provide that coin option, because Park Mobile, it is totally on your phone. It's a contactless system. And so we had to reinstall meters in these lots to provide people coins, that coin payment option. But the most important thing is that it validated that inventory, design, implementation kind of phasing approach, and started to get us to think through some of the communication products and all those things, you know, towards the broader application of this technology to both of our commercial corridors. Positive response from the majority of businesses. We had to work through with one business that was predominantly one demographic that loved coins, and we're still kind of working with them on that. And that's just a legacy kind of approach that you have to recognize that and work through it. But like I mentioned, it validated our action, our transition, which was great. And if I looked at the logic model, the things that are highlighted in yellow, those are the things that we got to work through with that pilot of putting Park Mobile over those municipal lots. And so it was an important kind of introduction and a validation of a lot of the things that we were thinking with in terms of this broader project. So that public-private shared parking partnership, that second objective, we really, and the things that I'll highlight in red there, our focus is on a high demand time frame, which is 6 to 11 p.m. The little graph on the right-hand side is from one of the parking studies, and you can see this huge spike of off-street parking demand around 6 to 8 p.m. and then it starts to peter off towards the end of the night. That is that kind of commercial rush for bars, restaurants, and all those things that we have lots of like kind of pockets of restaurants and bars here in Lakewood where the demand just spikes like that. The picture there is of a business. It's AutoZone. It is in one of those districts that has probably about a dozen bars and restaurants, all within 500 feet of each other. That's a lot that has almost 50 spaces that just sits empty from like 8 p.m. until midnight. And you will get towed there in an instant if you park there. It's a perfect kind of opportunity to look at and work through the management, the liability, and the revenue kind of system of a public-private shared thing that you could layer Park Mobile right on top of that. Use their existing enforcement, the people who are there, to tow people who park there, to leverage this and turn it into a public asset later in the day. And maybe there is that partnership between AutoZone and the city or whatever. So this is a program that's got much smaller, public information support, because it is really kind of business, city to business, and some of those things. But we're trying to get a pilot program started so that we can at least try to prove this and refine it towards maybe a broader application. Parking enforcement, structure, and staffing. This is the first of those kind of optional things out there. This has a lot of benefits, but it's difficult. It would be difficult to implement. There are other cities, and so if you look at the actions and complete the feasibility study, we got to look at the structure for enforcement, and that's timeframes. There are a lot of cities out there that do enforce in the evenings and on Saturdays. Lakewood does not, and so making that leap it's a big hurdle to get over, to convince leadership and the residents that we're going to start doing this. But it has a lot of benefit, because you could start to apply value to on-street parking during the highest demand timeframes. Right now it's free, and that the demand curve, you can see that spike again for on-street parking, and that includes residents coming home from work at the same time that commercial patrons are trying to get to restaurants and bars, and it creates a nightmare between 6 and 8 p.m. And so enforcement is needed during those higher demand timeframes. We would need additional staffing for that. And so looking at that as well, it's feasible. 2 part-time employees could cover that time frame, and I believe it's feasible. But this is something that needs this feasibility study, and it needs consideration before you would implement it, because there are things like residents who depend on on-street or off-street parking, and street parking right now. How do you treat them? If they have no other options to park their car, you have to come up with some kind of an accommodation, whether it's a permit system or something for them to you can't just, it's very difficult to make that. You could do it, but it's very difficult to make that transition, to start charging them a lot of money between 6 and 10 p.m. And the last one is the permit zone designation. That map shows our random kind of smattering of permit streets. You can see the brown lines. Those are the permit streets out there. How they got in place, I have no idea. And no one here does either. There is a very kind of squishy portion of our parking code that talks about the authority for permit zones and the times. They're predominantly 8 in the morning to 4 p.m. So they address that kind of business people coming into the city and parking in residential areas. They try to avoid that and have the business folks park elsewhere so that residents don't get parked out of their neighborhoods. We basically need to figure out a process to implement a zone, and then have a formal process to remove a zone, and that needs to involve residents. This, however, is very sticky, because if it doesn't address the underlying parking demand in the area appropriately, it can make conditions worse. And the implications of implementing the wrong solution for that predominant driver of parking demand is something that we got into, and I did in the Edwards area, that really high density bar, restaurant, residential area. What I found was that the demand, as best as we could tell, the demand was caused primarily by residents. It was residents competing with residents for parking spaces on their street. They thought, everyone's perspective was that, oh, it's all these people coming in to go to the bars and the restaurants. The demand curve just didn't support that. It showed that it was highest at 6 in the morning and highest at midnight. And there's not a lot of people, that are still left in that area except for residents trying to park on the street. If you throw a permit zone at an area where the demand is driven predominantly by residents, you will get bad things. people then get a permit in their hand and they feel entitled to street parking. And I got some pictures there from a lot of other neighborhoods, not just Lakewood. Lakewood is front and center there with the I'll just call it the dog incident that someone decided to do to someone else's car. But there's lots of notes and maps and people leaving maps and figuring out, oh, this is my space and this is your space. And it's not. This is the public right of way. It belongs to everybody. And so this is a very residential permit issues is an extremely sticky issue to go down. And so we do need to clean that up, but implementing a citywide program of permits is probably not the way we want to go, unless there's something up. Just because of the high demand right now and the high tension on parking, this has a strong potential of making it worse. This is a plan of action and milestones. So this is my last slide. The 4 objectives are on the left, and then kind of the sub actions that are in there that were all covered. And then it just shows the spread over time and how you can distribute those. The red are kind of those decision points with the mayor or city council for each of those. Some things do carry forward into implementation, and that's like, on the bottom lines of some of those with the lighter colors that go forward. Like meter procurement is a decision that's made maybe in March, but then I've got to continue to work on that and then it picks up again in September with the budget hearings and everything and getting that money programmed out into our capital improvement plan. The bottom 2 objectives, those feasibility studies are solid, but then I made the rest of them kind of hashed because I don't know what direction we're going to go right now based on leadership making that decision. We may decide to do nothing about enforcement or permitting or do something or something different, but that's kind of an option that's out there for any kind of a branch or change or a what if. And so given those 4 objectives, all those efforts that are going to play out over the next couple months and this year, what I'm hoping is that all these issues are going to turn into kitties and rainbows, but we know that's probably not the case. They're still going to be there. It's just this is a day-by-day management type of an issue for a municipality that just you're trying to just make, it's a game of inches in terms of improvements. And so these things, especially the shared parking and the digital management, should provide some benefits. But looking at enhancing enforcement and potential permitting processes could also lend some improvements. So that is where I will stop. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. I think this is very thorough, obviously, with all your data and the different components there. So congratulations on that. Good luck with this wicked problem. I didn't realize that parking was going to is this complicated, but it definitely is an issue. And it's one of those things that I think at the municipal level, people take for granted. It's like, oh, it's fine, no big deal, but this is a major issue to resolve. I do have a question, and then I don't know if this is something you ever thought about, but down in Medina here, we don't have the parking issues that you have, or even parking meters, to my knowledge. For the most part, there is some, metered areas, but most of it's free. But they did put in 2 parking garages on the north and south side of the square. Have you ever thought about doing anything like that, or is there any, land for that kind of thing to alleviate some of these problems?
Yeah, Lakewood definitely, land is at a premium based on our density, and parking is an extremely expensive land use in terms of construction. Like structured parking, it can cost upwards of, it's almost $25,000 a parking space. And so that is something, as we consider, now I see Trent's question on there and the proposed upcoming developments. Parking is always a challenge when you have, large residential developments, and even like our downtown development at the hospital site. The parking for that is almost, it's like the first step that you have to get over. And so, that they looked at, can we bury some of this parking? Can we do some of those things? The cost of that is right now, especially, is so prohibitive at the front that it becomes the predominant factor on whether or not you can, something even pencils out sometimes in terms of the, offsetting revenue from retail, residential, and commercial spaces. So structured parking is it can be very expensive. We do have a couple of garages that are from the 70s, and they're in pretty bad shape. And I think that's something that downtown Cleveland's kind of going through too right now, with a lot of aging parking infrastructure. That you got to make the decision of, are you going to basically, fix it and maintain it, or is there a better use? I mean, like the Sherman-Williams development, a better use than surface parking is probably a horrible use in a lot of places like that, especially if you're looking to get density. But to answer Trent's question, yeah, every development that comes through Planning Commission, a parking plan is the first critical piece that they have to present and get passed. We do have parking minimums and maximums in Lakewood, and so that kind of provides that initial kind of left or right, or are you meeting, the requirements that the code outlines? And I'll tell you that's something as a planner that's out there that a lot of communities are looking at. For all the issues that parking causes, people look at, is that something that we really want to require, or do you let the market kind of handle that? And a lot of municipalities are removing parking minimums. And not making a development say you have to have at least 100 parking spaces. They allow the developer to kind of say, well, based on the market, we want to build 85 spaces or whatever. There's a lot of risk involved with that, but that can help alleviate some, I guess some process problems for cities like Lakewood that are super dense. And it's a hard way to try to incentivize people to find other ways to getting around than driving. And I think that's kind of it, at the foundational element of all of this stuff is how do we address that constant increase in the number of vehicles in Lakewood? Because it's just it's an easy thing. You bring more jobs here, more transit. We don't have a lot of control in that, but there are some things that we can try to de-incentivize parking, and that's adding value or valuizing on-street parking. That public resource is one way that you can address demand and try to incentivize people to find other ways to get to places or spread out the demand. You can make it really expensive to park very close to bars and restaurants and cheaper to park in off-street places and further away to try to value that and spread that demand out. But there is a book called The Cost of Free Parking, and it is very high for municipality because it just creates a lot of issues. If there's just nothing to de-incentivize people from buying cars and using them. So.
I'll follow up on that. I can't stand having to go to places and having to pay to park my car to go use, like to go to a restaurant or a shopping center or stuff like that. So I live down in Medina here, and I don't have to worry about that problem. But have you seen as a city or from your economic development department that you're losing any revenue from that or any kind of impact because of the parking situation?
No, I think, and that's a huge element for that feasibility study for expanding enforcement. I mean, that's I think my assumption and my hunch, I guess, going in to digging into those details and seeing what other municipalities, and you got to try to find other municipalities that have changed their policies or something, and maybe have some data on that. But my feeling is that the demand for parking in Lakewood is such a high level anyways, that the acceptance, the potential acceptance for additional enforcement or changing values or something would be a lesser consideration for people than the want or the need to get where they want to go. Our biggest consideration is how residents fit into that equation, especially residents that have nonconformities that can't park, that don't have off-street parking. There's a ton of people that do have off-street parking, and they just choose to park on the street. And so that's a behavior that can change. Some people don't have options. And those are the ones that we really have to pay attention to. Unfortunately, too often you only hear from the people you only hear from the behavior people, the people that don't want to park in their driveway. I like parking on the street. My wife, I leave before my wife does, and it's really inconvenient to move our cars around every day and all those things. And that I think and I don't mean to, lessen people's problems or whatever, but there is a certain approach in a city like Lakewood that you just have to accept when you live here, is that, street parking is at a premium, and it doesn't belong to anybody. And it has to be managed appropriately. And so that's why we really look towards policies from larger cities like, New York, DC. DC is a great resource for us, because we do share density and a lot of, a density and really a higher driving percentage of people, commuters, as compared to like Boston, New York, or some of the places where there's much more transit available. So.
Thank you. Alexander, do we have any other comments or feedback, questions in the chat?
No, I don't see any at the moment. And then just a friendly reminder, if you haven't already, please evaluate Dave's presentation. So the link should be in the chat.
Well, I don't know, Dave, if you should have worn a disguise for this presentation, but because I think you live in the area, and if anybody knows that you're the parking guy, you could have a dangerous position over there. But anyway, just joking there. But it sounds like a pretty wicked problem, and thank you for trying to tackle it here in this format. And if there's anything we can do for you with that cause as we move forward, let us know. So this is our last call for any questions or comments. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up for today and continue on with tomorrow.